That was lovely. I want to share with you this morning a little reading. And this is from Sidney Poitier, from his book, The Measure of a Man. Well, I'm no scientist, and I certainly don't have Carl Sagan's technical understanding of the universe and our position within it. I simply believe that there's a very organic, immeasurable consciousness of which we are a part. I believe that this consciousness is a force so powerful that I'm incapable of comprehending its power through the puny instrument of my human mind. And yet, I believe this consciousness is so unimaginably calibrated in its sensitivity that not one leaf falls in the deepest of forests on the darkest of nights unnoticed. Now, given the immensity of this immeasurable power that I'm talking about, and given its pervasiveness through the universe, extending from distant galaxies to the tip of my nose, I choose not to engage in what I consider to be the useless effort of giving it a name. And by naming it, suggesting that I, in my way, understand it. Though I am enriched by the language and imagery of both traditional Christianity and old island culture, many of my fellow human beings do give it a name and do purport to understand it in a more precise way than I would ever attempt. I just give it respect, and I think of it as living in me as well as everywhere else. The grand consciousness I perceive allows me great breadth and scope of choices, none of which are correct or incorrect, except on the basis of my own perception. This means that the responsibility for me rests with me. Sidney Poitier, from his book, The Measure of a Man. Such a beautiful writing. This means that the responsibility for me rests with me. To not try and name what we call God. To not try and put labels on something that is so immense that we can't possibly, in its fullness, understand its immensity or what it is. We can only understand what we, within ourselves, at any given moment, are at the consciousness to understand it. And we pray and affirm that that is always expanding into more good and to more love. But within that process of allowing our spiritual consciousness to evolve, we do, as Karen Drucker wrote and Leilani just sang, to be gentle with ourselves. And to be gentle with everyone else. We cannot tell people what to believe. We cannot tell people how to behave. Would you agree? And yet, boy, do we. But that's the human part of us. That's the egoic part of us. And we learn by that. Let's call it a learning tool. If we're paying attention, we can learn and grow from that behavior. So, today is the first Sunday of Lent in the Christian world. This last Wednesday was Ash Wednesday, which begins the 40 days before Easter. I have a piece here by Georgiana Tree West, a Unity minister. She was ordained, I think, in 1935, and she founded the Unity Center of Practical Christianity in New York City, and she served that ministry from 1936 to 1959. She said, "The Christian world is once again observing the Lenten season, the season of prayer and fasting that precedes the joyous festivity of Easter. It is commonly believed that the Lenten period has to do with the events of the 40 days preceding the resurrection. This is an erroneous idea. Lent is a church institution, and there is no authorization for it anywhere in the New Testament. The idea, however, has a sound spiritual basis. Moses, Elijah, and Jesus himself set a precedent for it. Each observed a 40-day period of prayer and fasting as a preparation for spiritual work. Moses received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai at the conclusion of his fast. Elijah talked with God on Mount Horeb, and at the conclusion of this period of prayer and fasting, and Jesus began his great spiritual ministry at the close of his fast in the wilderness. 40 days, a time of preparation. 40 is often, in the Bible, 40 is used a lot. If you've ever, those of you that are familiar with the Bible, if you have ever noticed, 40 shows up a lot. With Noah, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. In Unity, sometimes we interpret the number 40 as long as it takes. As long as it takes for us to come into a period of change of mind and change of heart, of having new awarenesses, and allowing the holy experiences that are around us every day and every moment, if we're paying attention, to awaken us to our divinity, and for us to remember that every other single person also shares that same divinity. We are made in the image and likeness of God. One Unity minister that I was listening to, one of these days I'm going to share her videos. She's just so great. And she said, "We are told that we are made in the image and likeness of God, not that God is made in the image and likeness of us." And yet, throughout the ages, God has been interpreted in many circles as a human being, right? So that's something to think about, to step back away from, and to allow the expansiveness of life to unfold. And so we are here in Lent. Normally in Lent, you are called upon to give something up. You know, people give up chocolate, which I never understood. Now you can give up milk chocolate. That makes perfect sense to me. But, you know, chocolate's healthy, right? Good chocolate. Or coffee, or alcohol, or you name it. Whatever it is that you think you need to give up in order to create a healthier life for yourself. And maybe that's true. You know, that might not be a bad thing. But in Unity, we talk about Lent as giving up a way of being that no longer serves us. To let go of negative habits, emotions, intellectual emotions and habits. it's a call to just come up higher, to find that higher ground. Do you know that song, Higher Ground? I almost called you, Leilani, to see if you could sing that. Can you sing it off the top of your head? For we are standing.
Oh, I'm thinking of Stevie Wonder.
Oh, Stevie. Well, that one would be good too, right? I was thinking of we're standing on holy ground. That's the one.
Yeah.
You know that one too?
No.
Okay. I won't put you on the spot there.
You sound good.
But if you want some Stevie Wonder later, we'll take that. But to go to that higher ground, to that higher calling, to find a way to release, to clear out and transform negative energies. One dear friend of mine, she is a spiritual leader of a unity ministry, and she always says you can't have a Sunday morning without having a Saturday night. And in ministry, that just seems to be so true. But for me this week, it was a Friday afternoon. And some of you have already heard this story, but you know who I am. I just lay it out there because the things that come to us are such great teaching situations and materials for us to learn from. I have my stories, but I know you guys have your own stories. So pay attention to them. Pay attention to the stories that happen to you and see if there's something that you need to be paying attention to learn from. So on Friday, I was talking to a very, very dear friend of mine. And we don't talk very often. We can go months without talking to each other, but we're always just right there. And we were in seminary together, so we go back, a couple decades and more. And boy, did I get annoyed. I got so annoyed that I called him out on how he was annoying me. I have never done that. And he annoys me often. And I probably annoy him, in loving, friendly ways. It's like, oh, come on, really? Just not big, important things. But, you talk, you share ideas, and you go through life. But boy, this time, I just said, no. You know how we tend to talk over each other? And I know I do this. And it became very clear to me very quickly that what I was so annoyed about is something that I do on a regular basis. And I was talking, and he just took over the conversation. And I said, I am still talking. And he was like, oh. And then, I continued answering the question that I felt he asked me to answer for him. And then it went into a place which was fine. But can you tell when you're not being heard? And when you're being not dismissed, you would never do that. None of this was personal, ever. But you know how we are so intent when someone is talking to us? We are so busy getting ready to tell them our thoughts that we just don't even hear them. Anybody guilty of that? Some hands? Randy, you never do that. You always allow for the perfect expression of another person. And then do you do reflective listening and say, I really hear you.
How did you know that?
It was a good guess. But we just do that as human beings. We do that. And so we ended the call and we brought it back around. But I was more intense than I have been in years. I can't even tell you when I have felt that intense in a conversation. It was probably in my second marriage. Right? The marriage that was, not is. So anyway, the point of all of this is to pay attention what is happening. To pay attention to what Spirit is calling us up to be. Now, my friend and I took care of the conversation, although I still had to argue with myself throughout the day and the next day on whether or not I needed to apologize. I don't know about men, but women tend to over-apologize. We have been enculturated that way, to be good little girls and to not speak out of turn. At least that's the way it was when I grew up. And so I was like, no, I don't need to apologize for this, but this, I was a little over the top here. And we're still playing telephone tag too, because I do want to own my own negative energy. Because I really, truly did not have a right to put that off on another person. And I was so actually shocked by it, because that's not the way I interact with people. But I was also very aware, and I hope this doesn't, well, no, I'm not even going to apologize for that. I was having a Fonnie Willis moment. I was, and those of you that know what I'm talking about know what I'm talking about if you think the same way I do. And those of you that don't, you can go look it up. But this woman this week stood in her power, unapologetically stood in her power, while there were forces that were trying to overpower and minimalize her. And I haven't told my friend that yet, and he will definitely get it when I tell him that, I'm quite sure. He will understand where I was coming from. So the point of all of this is, as I said, that's my story. We each have our own stories. But I had already been working on this Sunday message about transforming and clearing out negative energies as we come into Lent. Of allowing ourselves to step into that higher holy ground and to pay attention how we're showing up in the world. To allow for the transformation within us to come up higher, to stand in our truth that we feel is our truth, but to do it without stepping on anybody else's feelings. Hello, Twyla, right? We still have a responsibility to be responsible in the way that we communicate. But to also let it be okay to communicate as we go through this process of transformation, as we go through this process of awakening. So this morning when I woke up, I kept having this thought of, I talk a lot about heart math and heart connectedness and the benefits of the healthy hormones that run through our body when we are doing our heart-focused breathing. You will hear me talk about that quite a bit. But the question I woke up with was, what happens to our bodies when with the negative energy? Now, theoretically, we know that it's not good for us, right? It creates all sorts of toxic chemicals in our system that just overall is not good for us. But I did some research, and a couple of sites that I came upon. This one is from the National Institute of Health and the National Library of Medicine. And in 2013, there was a study done. I'll reference this, but if you want it, I can give it to you so you can look at it yourself, by Pressman, Lopez, and Gallagher in 2013. And I want to make sure I'm giving you the right thing. And they conclude that across the globe, negative emotions are bad for one's health. Yet, just how bad negative emotions are for health depends on culture. I found that interesting. In U.S. American context, in the United States American context, negative feelings are construed as the individual's responsibility and as harmful. In Japanese context, negative feelings are construed as rooted in relationship and as natural. And so they cited this one study, but then they went. I want to shortcut this for you. The result of negative energy in our body stems greatly from the meaning that we give to it. Does that make sense? The words of a Japanese psychiatrist underscore the cultural distinction observed here. Melancholia, sensitivity, fragility, these are not negative things in Japanese context. It never occurred to us that we should try to remove them because it never occurred to us that they were bad. But sometimes when we are feeling, oh, I'm being too sensitive, I'm too fragile, we assign negative connotations to our emotions when in fact they are just emotions. And they are part of the human experience. But it is another example of us not being gentle with ourselves, right? So allow yourself to feel your feelings. And as I was continuing to process this experience that I had with my friend and what was mine to do to take care of whatever I needed to take care of, there was a part of the conversation that very deeply within me said, no, there's nothing there to clean up. You are okay. It's that small, higher wisdom voice within me telling me to be gentle with myself and not overcompromise who I am. Now there's another study, I guess it's an article from the New York Times in 2023. Lean into negative emotions. It's the healthy thing to do. Recent research suggests that while bad feelings can affect your well-being, that is the overall thing. We don't want to live and dwell in the negativity because it does release toxins into our system. Your perspective on those feelings can play an even bigger role in your mental and physical health. In a study published last month in the journal Emotion, researchers found that people who habitually judge negative feelings such as sadness, fear, and anger as bad or inappropriate have more anxiety and depression symptoms and feel less satisfied with their lives than people who generally perceive their negative emotions in a positive or neutral light. Do you find this helpful? As a way to pay attention to what, one, is going on in our body, and two, what meaning are we giving to them? I often teach to feel your feelings. It is allowing for your feelings, as this article in the New York Times says, to lean into your negative feelings so that they can pass on through. Because that's what we want. It's okay to be worried. It's okay to feel afraid. It's okay to be angry. Just don't let it take up residence within your body, your mind, and your heart. Give yourself a break for feeling the way you feel. But I do invite you to not harm any other person because you're feeling those feelings. They are yours to process. They are yours to heal from. They are yours to use as a tool to raise you higher, not to slam somebody else. I think we can all agree on that. So in closing, as we enter this time of the Lenten season, of moving into that precious story of the 3 years of Jesus' teachings that are powerful. And you know, he was not a silent little lamb. He was a social justice change maker, which is why he died. People wanted to shut him up because he was teaching the love and the truth and the self-empowerment that the kingdom of God is within you, that we have the power to transform our lives and to stop giving our power away. And he was crucified for that. So I invite you to come into this period of being gentle with yourself, being honest with yourself, to pay attention to what is going on in the world and make wise and conscious choices. And so it is.